Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to another edition of the Did You Know Crypto podcast. Today we're going to be talking to Vin about the cults of Bitcoin, kind of talking about the religious nature and the theological aspects of the different cults of Bitcoin, whether it's the store of value, the electronic cash, or kind of this cult of personality and maidenets. Bitcoin is everything that is found within BSV. It's a really interesting discussion. I always really enjoy talking to Vin about these kind of more esoteric topics that we don't often discuss in Bitcoin. We more focus on the technology, how things are going to be implemented, how to gain more adoption, how to convince people why it's better, those types of things. But I think one of the important aspects is recognizing how Bitcoin affects people. And once we realize that, we will be able to better help people to get involved in Bitcoin, right? Because if you don't understand why people would like it or why people don't like what you're trying to sell them, you're never going to be able to sell them anything. So anyways, if you guys could really quick though, head over to iTunes, leave a 5-star review, written review as well. That really helps out. It's the biggest thing you can do. Also go over to supportmypodcast.com. That's supportmypodcast.com. And I'm going to be introducing very soon a discount program. So that's at the same website, supportmypodcast.com/discounts. And you can sign up right now. And pretty soon we'll be offering discounts on everything from health products to Trezors to Keep Keys, Bitcoin merchandise, t-shirts, all that kind of stuff. So just head on over, sign up, and we'll be offering you guys some value back for being supporters and listeners of the podcast. So I want to thank you though real quick. Thanks for listening. Thanks for leaving reviews. Thanks for following on social media. It's a really huge help and I really do appreciate it. So enjoy the show. Today, I'm very pleased to welcome back to the show Vin Armani, CTO of Cointext, founder of Counter Markets, Bitcoin Cash evangelist, author of Self-Ownership, and serial entrepreneur. Vin, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me back on, Dustin. I've really been enjoying the work that you've been doing lately, so I was really happy when you reached out.
All right, no, I appreciate that. Yeah, it's been interesting as this thing has kind of been evolving over time, and kind of as we're talking just right before we started recording, the last episode that I did about toxicity and Bitcoin, and that kind of really kind of fit into a article that you just released on Counter Markets, kind of talking about the cult of Bitcoin and kind of the different factions within the cult. So maybe we should just kind of start off, because a lot of people probably may not be kind of familiar with these kind of somewhat inside baseball, I guess, kind of discussions that we've had. Just kind of discuss the concept of the cult, and that it's, first off, it's not a negative thing. It's just a description of something that exists.
Yeah. So I'm using cult basically to mean a small community that is in some ways a self-enclosed religious group or organization. So a cult is sort of like it's a religion that is where you have kind of access to all of the members in a way. I like to think of it that's the easiest way, that it's like you can sort of draw a circle around who are the people who are part of X. And once it gets much bigger than that, to where there's like this sort of global community, nameless, faceless sort of numbers from all over the place, all types of different countries and whatnot, no real specific leader that you can point to, maybe even some people who follow the ideology, but they don't even really talk to anyone else. Like, there are lots of Christians out there who are like, I'm a Christian, but they don't go to church. They don't really hang out with other Christians. It's not that religion is a huge part of their life, but they're like, no, but I'm a Christian, or I'm a Buddhist, or whatever it is. That's when you start really getting into that it's a religion. So I'm basically talking about kind of like a mini religion, and by religion, Emil Durkheim, who is sort of the sociological I guess he's the guy that everybody looks to for the academic description of religion. So his description is that basically it is a community of people who have a set of beliefs and practices that encompass the what he calls the sacred and the profane, and that the group of them all together form a church. And so, what he means by sacred and profane is that they have some things, usually these are kind of arbitrary things, either certain holidays, certain ritual practice, what we would consider ritual practices, certain beliefs about the world or about people or about even, let's say, other people, other tribes, or whatever it is, that those beliefs are considered sacred, and that other beliefs are considered sort of profane or mundane. And the sacred doesn't necessarily have to mean that it's good. It could also be things that are bad. So it's like prohibited things as well would fall within the sacred. And so these are things like dietary restrictions, sexual practices, keep the Sabbath, oh, on Sunday you go to church, like that's what you do. The Eucharist, or Hanukkah celebration. We just got done with Ramadan, so it's like to have a period of fasting that's like this sacred and holy thing. These are the sacred practices, and usually to the outside world, to somebody who's not in that religion, these they can look super weird. They can make no sense because they don't. That's one of the most important things about them, is that, you can try and go and explain and rationalize and think about like, well, how did this come into being? Like for instance, like the Jewish practice of not eating shellfish. You're like, well, maybe it was because back in the day they didn't have good refrigeration and blah blah. But that's not certainly not the case now. That's not why they don't. That's not why it's prohibited now. So this is just something where it's like, well, the reason that we do it is because it's part of our sacred practice and it makes us a part of the church to participate in this practice. And so what I was doing in the article was basically applying that framework to some of the things going on in Bitcoin. Particularly, it's been really interesting now that we have had the Bitcoin SV split, that we have these, actually, for people within Bitcoin, these three, and maybe even people from outside of Bitcoin, if they were to just look in on the conversations, three what I call Bitcoin cults, as in BTC, Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin SV, that that have uh, some views that are even diametrically opposed in terms of their ideology. And to think that they all sort of sprung out of the same thing within the past decade is really weird when you look at some of the things that are believed. And so that's what I was basically going into, is I was saying, particularly as an entrepreneur, because that's what we cover in Counter Markets. If you could figure out this and decode it, how could you better build a business or decide which community you might want to build your project within?
Yeah, it's interesting because you talk about just stepping back just a little bit with the practices, and let's say, like you brought up Judaism, not eating shellfish, and that there may have been same thing with not eating a pig, and within other religions as well, is that there's been speculation of it being, because of certain diseases that may have been caused, and that this may have just developed into a religious practice because it was actually a good hygienic practice, the same way of washing your hands ritualistically and
Hmm.
all that kind of stuff. But it's interesting because it's not just in traditional religion, because you see that in all different ways. Like when I was in the Marine Corps, we had that, like, it was, especially in the Marine Corps, it's a tradition is a
Hmm.
big thing, and especially since it's the smallest, it's kind of especially within it, has this kind, it's very much a cult
Hmm.
within it, where you have these sacred figures, you have the origin story of
Hmm.
basically a bunch of recruiter going and recruiting a bunch of drunk people in a bar back in the Revolutionary War times, was basically the origin story of it. And from there you have kind of this timeline of this building of tradition, and you have things like on your dress blues uniform, you have these red stripes down the side, and they signify a certain battle and all that kind of stuff. You have certain rituals that you do when you pick up certain ranks and all that. It's really interesting as you start to look at all these different groups, as I'm starting to examine Bitcoin in this same fashion, and then I kind of look back at my own experience, and you kind of look back and see how important it is, because tradition and ritual is extremely important for any kind of group that wants to survive and thrive. And once and to me, my takeaway from what you see with religions that have either thrived or religions that have started to die off or are waning or whatever, when you look through their histories, is that the breakdown in the ritual process and the breakdown in the kind of community recognition of those rituals is what kind of starts to be a canary in the coal mine of its demise. And and within Bitcoin, we kind of see that, and you talk about that in the article. And counter markets, if I'm not mistaken, when you sign up, you get your first issue free, right?
That's right. You get the current issue, so you get whatever the current issue is. So it'll be out by the time this is that this episode is out. So if people want to check this
Okay.
article out, it's a great time to get your first issue of Counter Market. So countermarkets.com.
Yeah, no, and I'll link to that in the show notes as well. But when you talked about, and I'll have you kind of go deeper into this aspect of it. But in each cult of Bitcoin and BTC and BCH and BSV, as kind of the largest of the groups that we see, I'm not really aware of within like Super Bitcoin or the other 400 different versions that have
I
come
don't
out.
think that I don't think that those actually have a cult around them.
And I
So
think that's why you don't really ever hear about them.
exactly.
And and they all have their specific, I guess, if you want to use the term sacraments, and if you and rituals that one outwardly does, right? So as a as with Catholics during like Easter, right? You'll do Stations of the Cross. You'll have the Ash Wednesday services. You have the normal Sunday services and all that kind of stuff, and that's an outward expression to let everybody know that you belong to this group. Whereas with with Bitcoin, you talk about that as being kind of the full node operation. With Bitcoin Cash, it's kind of more the peer-to-peer spending of that on daily transactions. And well, I'll let you explain it. You're much more articulate than I'll probably be for this.
So the first thing that I want to say is like totally great connection there on the military front. That the military traditions are all about building cohesion. And so you might say that in terms of applied religion and this sort of applied ritual for a strong purpose, the American military and British military are perhaps the greatest currently existing. So those are some very strong religions. And you'll notice that it stays like the whole thing is that you're never not a Marine. Once a Marine, always a Marine. So that's it. Blood in, blood out. That's interesting as well. You have the same thing with street gangs too. Like the street gangs that have been around for a long time, they have their interesting rituals as well. Nothing near, obviously, as pronounced and sort of systematized as the military. But this was one reason that in like April, when I was looking at Bitcoin SV, it really occurred to me that they had the most religious like, in that they had the strongest cohesion through ritual and sacred beliefs of any of the cults. And it really sort of threw me for a loop. And I actually tweeted out, I was like, you know what? I've been totally wrong about Bitcoin SV this whole time. It's a real, people like poo-poo it. Vitalik just came out and was like, well, it's obviously just a scam. And it's like, I don't know, dude. If I have to bet on what's going to last as a community, and money is a community. At the end of the day, money is a community. It's the community of people who believe that what you have in your pocket is worth a damn. So Bitcoin is a community. It's a community of people who believe that Bitcoin is actually worth something. And that's actually new. So if I've got a bet on a community surviving, I'm going to bet on the one that's got great rituals, because I look at the communities that have survived, Marine Corps, great example, and thrived and are able to continue to do so. They're chock full of ritual. They have very strong sacred beliefs, both prohibitions against things and also prescriptions, things that you must do in terms of clothing. But, they also have an actual figurehead, which helps, right? It helps to have an actual prophet or an actual human that you could look to, which, if you look at the great religions in the world, Christianity, named after Christ, you know what I mean? They used to call Islamic people in the West, used to call them Mohammedans because of Muhammad, Buddhism, obviously, Confucianism, right? These are all people. It's all people. So they've got that. The other ones don't. In terms of the actual the rituals that I talked about, because I thought that these were some where these were actual like outward practices, as you say. BTC, you will see a theme running through, and mind you, some of this, once you get to a certain point and you've sort of bought into the cult and you're following along that ideology, it's sort of got you. And so your value system determines what your next move is going to be at any given time, and what you think is valuable, what you are prohibited from doing. So very much the idea of running my own node. That is an incredibly strong ritualistic and ideological religious viewpoint of the BTC stalwarts, those who are within the cult. Now, mind you, not everybody who holds BTC is fully in the cult. Not everybody who holds BCH or anything like that. I'm talking about the people who are basically considered the thought leaders who move that particular culture forward. Many of the developers, I mean, you know the names. You've interviewed some of them on this show, So, running your own node, in some ways, if you take it in that context, you can start to see that that's actually what the BCH BTC split was about. That's actually what small blocks is about, because the whole idea of small blocks, if you take the word of a BTC maximalist, is to have decentralization. But it's really underneath it, it's all to say, I want to be able to run my own node, and I want the maximum number of people to be able to participate in this ritual, because this ritual is very important. And it is very important. I mean, this was the original, it's the necessary ritual of Bitcoin. It's the ritual that Satoshi did. It's the ritual that Hal Finney did. There was a point in time, early Bitcoiners, where if you weren't running a node, there was no other way for you to acquire or send Bitcoin at all. You had to be running a node. So this is, this is an ancient ritual that they didn't want to give up. And that's, that is going to create an issue with a group of people for whom it is not that important. So for me, when I got my first Bitcoin in 2012, and I think that this is sort of what separates the people who got in like mid 2012 from before, is that the blockchain wallet was out. And that was a great wallet. It still would hold up. That I didn't have to run a node. I didn't run a node until years later, but yet I had Bitcoin. I got Bitcoin. I sent Bitcoin to people. I got other people installing the blockchain wallet and whatnot. So you get this group of people, and they have a different impression of what Bitcoin should be, and that so much of it in BCH, and particularly this is obviously where Roger is coming from, right? What is the mantra? Peer-to-peer electronic cash for the world. Peer-to-peer electronic cash for the world. It's about spending. It's about spending. It's about spending. And so it isn't just like onboarding people's great, and sending it is great, but like BCH, more than any of the cults, when you see the virtue signaling is about, I bought something with BCH. It's about, oh, here's pictures of us at a meetup paying for something, paying for food, paying for drinks, purchasing, making purchases, moving it around. So, and this is really where I come from myself. So that was always what Bitcoin has been to me, and it's why I've gravitated and I feel very much at home in that milieu, in that environment. So then you have BSV, and you'll note that most of the people in BSV are significantly, well, actually, what's really interesting about them is most of them came in after the bubble of late 2017, early 2018. And so the value proposition, what they missed out on is they missed out on uh, sitting on buying a little bit of Bitcoin because it was kind of cool and interesting, and then all of a sudden I'm rich. Like, they missed out on that. That just wasn't there. And Bitcoin, as it had been this interesting speculative thing, so HODL doesn't even resonate with them. There's like, why would they HODL? As a matter of fact, for many of them, depending on when they get in, the price was steadily in decline from the time that they got in. So HODL is really actually the stupidest thing that you could do. But now what has happened is Craig Wright came along. They're there. He's a fascinating person. He's somebody you can't not talk about. Because he's fascinating. He's absolutely fascinating. The fact that he would claim to be Satoshi Nakamoto, the fact that he has the personality that he does, and all of this, in that way he's great for the space. In a lot of ways, he's terrible for the space. But Magnetic drew a lot of people in. There's an interesting narrative, something they can participate in. I think, especially for a lot of young men. Who maybe haven't fully formed don't have their moral compass fully there. And a lot of people who were not necessarily full blast libertarians. That's another thing about that later group of people that came in, was that initially it was really this very libertarian anarchist thing. But, with that 2018 run up, you had these people coming in who were not necessarily in it for ideological reasons. And they look at this guy and he's telling them, I'm going to make this the money for the world. Anyone who jumps in now is going to be rich. So you get that. So I'm going to follow this guy to the promised land, right? He's going to lead me to the promised land. I'm going to go. And he gave there were already people that were, and for a long time it's been the case, using the Bitcoin blockchain for uploading non-monetary data. But it was sort of frowned upon by many communities, considered spam, not useful. All of us who have been here for a while are like, that's a terrible use for a blockchain. All of a sudden, this guy comes along and says, actually, no, not only is that not a terrible use for a blockchain, I've got this idea about MetaNet. I'm going to put the whole internet on the blockchain. So you've got the few people like Unwriter, who are talented developers, but who are sort of working in this very niche portion of Bitcoin and not really getting a ton of credit for actually being pretty good and pretty innovative developers. They all flock to that. So you got those developers. There was some money involved in terms of investments coming from nChain and CoinGeek. And so what you ended up with was they needed to find a ritual too. So they've basically developed two rituals. One is obviously uploading to the blockchain. And uploading data, so images and whatnot. So you can virtue signal with that. That's really easy to virtue signal with on the internet, because you could just on social media, because you could just put a link to whatever it was. But the other one, and you'll see that now they have just done sort of an upgrade to it that's even better for them and for virtue signaling, has been the hand cash handles, the wallet. So like I've been fascinated by the Bitcoin SV. They have this little channel these guys from Britain do that's on YouTube. And at some point in the show, they basically do the Eucharist, their version of the Eucharist, where they're like, all right, everybody, I'm going to ping you. I'm going to ding you some dong. That's what they call it, because it makes a little ding dong noise. I'm going to ding you some dong. Everybody put your handles into the chat room, and everybody puts their handles in, and then he's like, all right, I'm sending to this person, this person, this person. And I'm like, oh, there's your ritual. Like, you literally have a ritual with your name that you get to put there with the little hand cash handle. Now they've done something called Paymail, which makes it look like an email, and you can buy and sell those as well. So it's like little religious tchotchkes and icons and stuff, the type of thing that gets sold in the Eastern Orthodox religion. Which I think, for that, it's those sorts of things where I'm like, don't count BSV out. But those are the basic things. I went really long-winded with that, but those are the basic rituals that I'm talking about. But obviously, there are more and more beliefs, and people who have been around this community are probably thinking of those things in their head right now as well.
No, yeah, definitely. I was just thinking when you were talking about how back to Bitcoin wanting to be able to have people participate in that ritual of the running of the full node. And that just kind of reminded me, back to the religious aspect, and within the Mormon church, the concept of the temple wedding.
Mm-hmm.
You can only do that once you become a fully invested member of the church after a period of time.
Mm-hmm.
I guess same thing goes for Catholicism and to a lesser degree, depending on Anglican and Lutheran churches, right? But you have those aspects of, well, you can't participate in communion of the Eucharist, and different denominations have different views of what the actual Eucharist is, symbolic versus actual physical representation.
And by the way, that was a cause for war. The whole transubstantiation thing, people died over, am I really eating? Does it really become the flesh and blood of Jesus, or is it just symbolic? People died over that fight.
Well, people died as well. I remember over simpler rituals. So I'm not. It's been a while. I'm not sure on the exact dates, but when I grew up in Alaska, and there's a group of Russian Orthodox people, and they're Russian by nationality, or I should say by ethnicity as well. They're Slavic. They came over. I want to say back in the 1800s. We always called them the Old Believers, and what it was is they'd been chased out of Western Slavic Russia. They disagreed over it was icons, as well as something as simple. We think it's pretty idiotic, or not idiotic, but that might be too strong. But as mundane as how many fingers you do the sign of the cross with.
Right, exactly. Yes.
And they were chased out of Moscow for that specific reason into Siberia. They ended up getting, it was one of the earlier pogroms that they had there. They got chased out of Siberia into Alaska during the early Russian outposts, and they still live there. They still live a very traditional life. They're not Amish in that they give up technology, but the women all wear flower dresses and bonnets. The men all have beards. They'll wear Western clothing, but they all worship the same way as they did a long time ago. And it's funny because I studied Russian in school, and they don't. If you try to talk to them, the modern Russian is totally different. It's like trying to talk to somebody in like old Anglo-Saxon versus modern English. It's very, very different.
Wow.
But to bring it back, I mean, they got chased out for just these very simple differences and rituals, and it is very interesting to see that kind of occur within Bitcoin. At first, I've done a lot more introspection over the last probably 6 to 8 months on my thoughts on Bitcoin. And I remember when I was, people have been listening, I've told the story, or just kind of like my background before, but when I kind of got back in, I just kind of remembered back to when I was like in 2013, 2014. And that was kind of it was a little bit different then than it is now, or even in 2017. Like 2015, it felt like that was kind of like right around when things got a lot more, and I was at a stalker level, right, not actually involved. But it seemed like in 2013, it was a lot more open and friendly and everything like that within the community. But for a while there, I was going like, I wish just everyone would just, be friends with each other, and we can have different projects. But and as I've come to understand, is that it doesn't mean you have to be a jerk to other people, but
Hmm.
I do understand it better why people are that way, and why that is necessary. Like, the more that I think about it, the more I would be worried about Bitcoin in general, whichever, whatever project you want to say that you're a part of. I would be worried about that project if there wasn't some quote unquote toxicity in it, because toxicity
Well,
means people
yeah.
care.
Well, and also it's part of the whole sacred thing, right? So, you don't have to be a jerk to everybody, but in order to have social cohesion, you're going to need to be a jerk to some people. Those people being apostates, right? So it's like the 2 minute hate in 1984, right? Emmanuel Goldstein, that there's 2 minutes a day that everybody gets up, they show a picture of Emmanuel Goldstein, and everybody just yells, "Ah, asshole, blah 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 blah." You know what I mean? Like that it's very important to have a common enemy and to be able to throw stones at them. So even if that common enemy is, as the religion sort of grows and as it matures and evolves, the common enemy becomes abstracted. So, I mean, in certain Protestant Christian faiths, not used as much, the term used as much by Catholics, but the concept of the devil or Satan is often referred to as the enemy. So that is the manifestation or the archetype of the common enemy at which we are going to throw stones, a scapegoat of sorts. And so when you have, though, these small cults, especially ones that used to be together, um, that is going to manifest as individuals for sure. And so you've got, I think, coming from BCH and BSV, the villain characters of BTC, I think a lot of that falls on Greg Maxwell. He's sort of like, I'm not talking about just the average people that people are like, oh, I really don't like this guy. I'm talking about the people who are seen as like the devil incarnate. And for the BTC people, that's Greg Maxwell. And then it's obvious for BCH. For BCH, it's Roger Ver, and for BSV, it's Craig Wright. And then there it's down from the hierarchy in terms of the lesser demons, right? But the devil himself is in BCH is Roger Ver, and in BSV is Craig Wright, and in BTC, I mean, it's it's really diverse there, but I would say that it probably falls mostly on Greg Maxwell's shoulders. So it's not like you have to be a dick to everybody, but it's kind of like you have to publicly hate on certain individuals, so I know you're cool, so I know that you're one of us. And that's just a normal human process when it comes to community. That's just how it goes.
Yeah, that's kind of the most stark example, like you brought it up earlier with BSV, is that the difference with BSV than all the others is that it has a actual figurehead, right? It has a uh kind of like a higher order figurehead, and then it kind of has that lesser order figurehead that's
Hmm.
kind of also in the shadows, and part of it as well. um but it is very the you know I have to admit I dismissed it. I kind of just was waiting, at some point, right, it's just going to implode, and
Right.
that's going to end. And I was talking to a mutual acquaintance of ours last night about some of the issues with or just the amount of money that's been invested in patents. And that is the amount, when you look at what it costs to file all these sorts of things,
Hmm.
is that it's no small amount of money. It's not like the copyright where that cost, $55 plus
Right.
I think it was like, a few $100 or $800 or whatever it was for an expedition fee or
Right.
expediting fee. This is like some real money being putting down. So I think that at least definitely within that group, there's real investment, both mentally and of monetary value within it. It is very interesting. I keep on saying that, but it is
Well, it
that
is.
it, because it is markedly different from to me from BTC and BCH
Oh yes.
and how it operates and the people that are involved, and also it has been strangely magnetic for some people,
Mm-hmm.
and people that have been attracted to that. And then it's a weird transition. You see people that had one set of beliefs, and then it seems like within 30 to 60 days, it's a mass turnaround. It's like they went away on that retreat weekend just to
Yep.
kind of get their
Yep.
chakras aligned, and
Yep.
then all of a sudden they come back and they're trying to sell you flowers at the airport.
Yep. That's it. That's it. Well, what I've there's I'm not going to name names, but there's an individual who I think you have had on the show, as a matter of fact, who I saw that change happen just in the last 60 days, but I am knowing this individual, and having spent time with this individual, like in person, in real life, like, and had some fairly personal conversations about some deep matters. Um, I think that transformation on this person's part is, I have to guess that it's the cult love bombing. So this is what's so interesting about BSV. To the outside, um, they appear to be very, very prickly. They appear to be really nasty people, a lot of them. There's a lot of trolls. I know that a lot of them have multiple accounts that they use just to attack people, just to brigade, and all of that. That's what it looks like externally. And this was one of the reasons that I found, watching. I was obsessed for a few weeks, and every day I would watch this BSV channel because it's internal. And it's almost like I had broken up the party, because I'd like at first I would just watch for about a week, and then I started showing up in the chat room just to see like my name pop up and then see what they would do, because they interact with the chat room. And what was interesting was just watching them on their own. Yeah, they were talking crap about people externally, but the things that they were saying about, and this is a sort of a exceptionalism that really entered into Christianity with Calvin. This is what Calvinism's main sort of technology was this idea of exceptionalism, which is now pervasive throughout, especially evangelical Christianity. This idea that the people who are here and who are involved with us are the most intelligent, most kind, most generous. If you're here, then I know you're intelligent. I know that you're super smart, because it's only the smartest people that are involved here. It's only the best people, and only us. We will be the only ones to really thrive in this situation, because we're the only ones who have the secret knowledge, and everybody else, they just don't even know. And then half of the other people are evil. And that's really what's going on there. And it's just like, you've got maximalists in BTC who are prickly in that way towards, like, especially like the Giacomos and everything. But I actually like Giacomo. You know what I mean? Even though he'll, still call me a scammer and all of that, we talk and we get along and we like each other. But they don't have internally, you don't see that there's this sort of this love bombing of being like, yeah, because you're hodling, you're the greatest, smartest, most wonderful people, and oh, you're great, and oh, I love you, and oh, you're so wonderful, and all of that doesn't happen. But yet that's a very, very important part of quickly building a cohesive community around a set of ideals. The other two chains that we're mentioning, the communities aren't doing that. And I'm not saying that I want to see them do it, but I'm just saying, when you see these things happening, you should take notice, because that's actually the mark of the beginning of a successful cult. And successful cults sustain themselves.
Hey folks, I hope that you're enjoying this episode as much as we did recording it. I don't have any sponsors, but if you could do me a big favor and go to iTunes and leave a 5-star or a written review, that would help me out a lot. You can also help out by going to supportmypodcast.com. That's supportmypodcast.com, where you're going to find all the other ways that you can help out. If you actually go to the discounts tab, that's supportmypodcast.com/discounts, you can get on an early mailing list, and you will get access absolutely for free as a listener and supporter of this podcast to discounts for such things as VPNs, Bitcoin wallets, Bitcoin related clothing, as well as other kind of health products that I think are very helpful for people to just live a better life. So go over to supportmypodcast.com/discounts and sign up today. Yeah, you see that as one of the things that I talked about earlier was a little while back was Bitcoin as a somewhat similar to Hinduism in a way, is that Hinduism had experienced kind of a major downfall when Buddhism, this is a very generalized version of history, but when Buddhism was introduced, it almost supplanted Hinduism in the Indian subcontinent. And basically what happened was that portions of the Brahmin priesthood and all that kind of adopted elements of basically what was popular with the people with Buddhism, and they made that part of their belief system. They incorporated some of the same deities and practices and all that, and then eventually over time Hinduism recaptured its former spread on the Indian subcontinent. Never really expanded past that much, but it did reclaim itself by doing that. And in a way, I always felt that Bitcoin was somewhat like that, in that it could absorb things out, that when we think about, if one project, when they talk about, anonymity or whatever, right? And that kind of definitely within the Bitcoin BTC crowd, is that if something actually proves out to be, useful and also secure and doesn't conflict with the other elements of Bitcoin and the game theory and all that kind of stuff, then we can just incorporate that at a later date, right? But in a way that Bitcoin's kind of like that, where it can kind of look at outside groups that do those sorts of things that are popular. But when you look at that, point's well taken within the welcoming aspect of it. When you have that community, right? When you see whether it's churches or CrossFit or vegan groups or whatever it may be, the ones where they actually create an internal community, because that's what people are really searching for.
Of course,
people are always searching for that internal community of in 50, just probably 50 years ago, 50 to 100 years ago, you'd find that kind of in your local church. If you were Lutheran, you'd go to the local Lutheran community in whatever city you end up coming to, or what have you, and you would kind of find that. And there was certain festivals every year that you would do. There was coffee and donuts after mass on Sundays and all that kind of stuff, and that's what built up that community, and you could look to each other for that. And there is somewhat a lack of that I see within BSV. Just I interact as a person that's probably somewhat abrasive with
it's easy to be abrasive with them. Easy to be abrasive with them.
Yeah, but I mean, I try to I shouldn't say that. Like, that's trying to make myself cast in a good light. I am kind of a jerk quite a few times. But when you actually look within those communities and they're talking to each other from the outside, they are very, very supportive, and you're doing a great thing, and you've got oh yeah, I just onboarded somebody onto Handcash, and here, let me send that person that you just onboarded some money, and it's these people get these physical dings. I mean, Jeffrey Tucker talked about that when he first got introduced to Bitcoin years and years ago, when he first got converted, and that was his aha moment, was that ding on his phone when that wallet registered that he'd gotten a payment, and he just bought what ended up he sold Eric Voorhees what ended up being like a $16,000 bow tie. with by the time that Bitcoin was valued at in 2017, I think. So it is like that. It seems to me that within uh, BSV and Bitcoin Cash as well, it's that kind of that ding is
Hmm.
that ritual within that group.
Yeah, it's it's so interesting to watch that process with BSV. And you can also see what's valuable because you can see what things are improved upon. So it's like it's so interesting that here they had this sort of hand cash handles thing, but that was just one wallet. And there's, they have money button and they have these other wallets and everything. And so a decision was made to be like, well, we need to be able to have something that we can expand out beyond this to all the wallets that we can do within our system and within the community. To enable that, that's actually a super valuable and important. It's not just about onboarding somebody, right? Because like my business, Cointext, I think we've definitely given people more of any of the wallets out there in the last year. I'm sure that we have onboarded more no coiners to being Bitcoiners than anybody else. Just because you don't need to download a wallet to do it, and it's like, and there are people out there who are crazy about it. Probably some of the tipper bots have done it too, but are you really in control of your funds? That's tough to know one way or the other. So that's great, right? That you can onboard somebody, but it's a completely different thing to be like, okay, I onboarded you. Now I'm going to show you what our community is. And all of a sudden, I'm just sitting there and my phone starts going off with money. People I don't know are sending me money. I mean, that just doesn't happen to somebody who hasn't that experience in and of itself. I think is enough of a state break for most people to be like, okay, I'm interested to know more. What's happening here? What's going on? Who are these people? Where are they? How can I communicate with them? How are they sending me this money? And at that point, you've got them. You've got them. And so it's very interesting that it's interesting to see that that's a huge part of the value structure. And more than anything, though, what I find interesting, especially as someone who's building point of sale stuff and really trying to move funds. I mean, right now I'm working really hard on payment protocol stuff to actually enable people to buy things. Again, that's a BCH cult thing. That what they did with the expansion into this paymail thing, which basically looks like an email, but it's not an email, but you use it to as basically an address alias across the whole BSV ecosystem of wallets, which is like 4 wallets or whatever. But um, the fact that that's clearly not designed to pay invoices or buy things or anything like that. It's clearly designed to reduce the friction and increase the capability of people to do that love bomb. That literal ding somebody some dong ritual love bomb. Which is actually super smart, man. Like it's not something to scoff at. Um, it's the growth within that community. I think is going to be very interesting to watch, and what they value is going to be interesting to watch because they don't seem to be valuing the same thing. They don't seem to be valuing price. They really don't. They were actually saying like it was a positive thing that they were delisted, and in some ways it has been positive for the price because they're only on little exchanges. A tiny amount of volume moves it. The exchanges that they happen to be on are quite easy to manipulate, and you've seen their price skyrocket since they were delisted. So it's like it's people need to be paying attention that the rules are maybe not what they think they are.
Well, and that and their one of the later memes that they have in their community is number go up
Mm-hmm.
is their big ding on every other project, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
and it's not exactly unfair, right? Because we all pay attention to the price, and if we've been involved, in whatever project we're holding X amount of whatever,
Mm-hmm.
we would prefer that that number to be worth more than it
Sure.
was, right?
Sure.
It's almost as a valuation of our time and effort and investment, right? And where the BSV crowd is they are actually mocking that concept of, although I'm not 100% sure on their on the long term um, of them holding on to that concept, but it is kind of interesting where their big thing is like number go up. It's not, like we don't really care,
Well, you have to
right
think
now
about
or
one
whatever.
reason why they don't care. I think the main reason why they don't care is that most of them are not holding that much, because that's not what the value that they get is. The value that they
Yeah.
get is the other human beings in the community. They're only holding enough so that they can participate in the ritual, because that's what matters to them. And that's not like that's really something, again, to not just ignore and not just let go, because it's not enough. It's almost like if you could combine all three, you've got Voltron, you know? And it almost makes you think that we're not done with forks. If there was a fork that was able to combine all three, which there probably will be, or that was able to better combine them, or a generation from now, if some of these things, as you say, are starting, if we start to integrate them, but not to integrate the technology, like not that, now they're talking about, oh, look at BTC, they're trying to add a new opcode that does what check data sig verify does on BCH. I'm not talking about that, because I don't think those things are actually the important things. I think the important things are the social things and are the rituals. So it's like, it's really all about not grabbing the technology or the opcodes or Schnorr or whatever it is from the other chains. That's kind of a feather in the belt if you're the one to put it out first, knowing that somebody else has been talking about doing it. I'm talking about the real practical things of building the community by reaching out and sort of absorbing some of those rituals, just like, as you said, Hinduism, the Brahmins were able to bring it back by doing that from out of Buddhism. I think there's an opportunity for thought leaders in the various different chains to start doing that, and it will no doubt increase the number of people that are coming to your chain.
Yeah, I think that within Bitcoin and BTC is that it's that we that it, there's not that thing, right? There's the meme of stacking sats, but that's kind of very insular, um, and there's not that ding effect that you
Mm-hmm.
have, right? So there's not that, you should buy Bitcoin, here's why, and then I'm going to share Bitcoin with you, right? Especially, I mean, it's part of a feature of Bitcoin as it's been done is the higher fees. It doesn't make it as easy to do where you want to send somebody, 50
No,
cents,
you
a dollar,
can't.
$2.
You can't.
Yeah.
On BTC, you can't do it, and it's one of the. But think about that for a second, right? And it
Well,
just
not instantaneously, I guess, if you're willing to, but it doesn't have that same effect of like me sending to you, and then
exactly.
depending on the mempool, being filled, will this show up in your wallet 2 hours from now, or 2 days from now. It
Or
doesn't have
2
that
weeks
same
from
effect.
now, or 2 weeks
Yeah.
from now, right? So it's like, it's not a guaranteed thing, because the important thing here is also velocity, right? So you want to be able to, it's two parts, and which is one of the reasons why when I built Cointext, I built it purposely as zero conf, so that it'll do chain dependencies. So where even though your transaction's still in the mempool, since it's on BCH, there's no replace by fee. Well, you can send it then immediately, and then that'll be in the mempool as well, chained to each other. So it's like two transactions become basically one chain transaction in the mempool, and you can actually do that, like 20 times if you want to. It'll chain 20 times in the mempool like that, and then they'll all confirm at one time. But that's actually super important for the sort of ritual that we were talking about, is that they can receive those funds, and then let's say they could onboard somebody else or send it to some, because it's not just about receiving it, it's about the sending it too, right? You want them to participate in the ritual as quickly as possible, because the ritual is sending, right? You want to be a recipient, but you also want to be a sender, because it's a communion between people. That's social cohesion. And what's interesting is that you could say this, I could say what I'm saying right now to the average BTC maximalist, and say, hey, dude, this is a super valuable thing that you are unable to do because of these high fees. So whatever you think about high fees and small blocks and whatever, one of the cons, if I said to them, one of the negatives of this is that you can't participate in doing this. I think I would wager that exactly the number 0 of them would think that what I just said was of any value at all. That it's like, well, that wouldn't be a reason to have low fees. That makes no sense. That's not a good reason to have low fees. But I think that if you think about it in terms of, well, what are you trying to do here? If Bitcoin is a community, and if the value of Bitcoin increases with the network effect, and the network effect, especially if you expect everybody to run their own nodes, like if that's what secures the network, and if this is a way to bring more people into the network, and you're preventing that from happening, well, you've kind of screwed up, and you don't even see it. And so this just shows you the level of evolution of thought in this space, that people aren't even thinking about these things. They're not even seeing these things, even though they're actually taking place, even though the case study is right in front of you. But of course, you're not going to see it if you just dismiss it like Vitalik and say, it's just obviously a scam.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, coming from Vitalik, but I think that there are levels of ritual as well, right? So we talked about going back to Bitcoin BTC, is that it's the main rituals, running your own full node, validating your own transactions, and
a lightning node now, and a lightning node.
Yep. And I think that when you look at within religions as well, is that there's different levels of rituals, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's that kind of that first ritual of, you kind of becoming part of the community, right? And I think that you see that, on Twitter or wherever it may be. And Twitter seems to be like the biggest spot. I don't really see that as much activity like on Facebook or I'm not really. No, I've never been a Reddit person, so I've never congregated there at all.
Well, anybody in a Reddit subreddit is already sort of in the community, right? So the thing with Twitter is that it's kind of that's where you can get your newbies. I think what you're talking about is like, I mean, could we call it baptism? Like that as a first ritual being baptism?
Yeah, kind of like, well, because usually when you come into a faith is right, you get first invited usually, or whatever's going on in your life, like that speaks to you. You come in and you talk, and then you kind of witness it. You look at what they're doing, and then you start to get kind of educated, and they'll tell you like, oh, well, here's what we believe, and here's why, and then that person finally kind of goes like, okay, I'm ready to take that first step, and right in the baptism, right, it usually be. I went and bought, $100 of Bitcoin on Coinbase or Uphold or or Cash App, right?
Yep.
And then you're kind of like, that was like kind of your baptism, right? Your first initial. It's not apples to apples, because it's not going to be the same. But
it is a commit. It is because it's a commitment, right?
Yeah.
So like that's part of the whole thing about baptism is that it's like you're going to come out here and you're going to trust the priest. He's going to dunk you. He's going to ritually, you're going to be somebody different at the end. When you come back up, you're somebody different, right? You're literally, or not literally, symbolically a different person. And that's kind of what it is when you go from no coiner to Bitcoiner, right? So it's like, once you're a Bitcoiner, you can never go back to having never had Bitcoin before.
And then but then you graduate, right? And but I see is within Bitcoin is that BTC is that you can buy that first $100, and then and ever and to some extent people be like, oh great, but you need to you need to run your own full node. You need to have this on some sort of secured wallet. You don't want to keep this on custodial sources and all that kind of stuff. And the biggest hang up I see is that there's not, and I have well, I guess in this context it's a good term. I have faith that we're going to come up with better technology, because one of the other things that fits into this is that user experience, user interfaces are just some of them are actually they're like 10 times better than they were, say, even like 3 years ago.
Sure.
But I think that's one of the biggest things is that, to me, we're not going to see mass adoption of fill in the blank of whatever your thesis is until you make that the default lazy option, if that makes sense. Like
Mm.
if well, we kind of have a little bit of room to go as well. We talked about, let's say 12 years ago, if you wanted to secure your wealth or hedge against inflation and central bank policies, you'd buy gold.
Yep.
And preferably you take possession of that actual gold.
Right.
But that was still a pretty niche group of people that actually did that.
Mm-hmm.
But um, when we're talking about, I think the reason that gold failed, as far as for within the libertarian concept of trying to convert the world, or at least your nation, the populace that lives in your geographic area, is that it's not the easiest thing to do. It's way easier to go and deposit your check into Wells Fargo and accidentally overdraw on occasion and pay the $20 fee, and next paycheck kind of makes up for it and whatever. You keep on going and living your life. Whereas, doing the smart thing is saving and all that. It's more difficult. So I really, I don't see us succeeding in whatever thesis it is until that's like the default lazy solution, because people will always choose one. Like historically, from what I've ever been able to research, is that people will always trade security for, safety and ease of use or whatever, fill in the blank. Like they will always choose to do that if the other option's easier. And
So
I think
let
we
me so
have
let
to
me
figure out
throw
how to
let
do
me
that.
throw something out here. Let me throw something out here. This is a realization that I had maybe 5-6 months ago about this, because I used to think the same thing, right? And obviously, I mean, you look at the projects that I work on. I'm all about ease of use, right? And my whole thing has always been, if it was just easier to use, more people would adopt it. And I think that it's true to a point, in that there needs to be very little friction for the baptism happening and for those ritual things that need to take place to enable the person to become a full-fledged member of the community. But beyond that, it's diminishing returns. Because what I've come to start to believe now, and it's why you've probably seen me talking about Bitcoin as a multi-generational project, is because when I look at it in the vein of religion and I look at how religions took over the world, you basically have two sets of individuals. At first, you have converts. Obviously, everybody has to be a convert. But eventually, converts are there are far fewer converts than there are people born into the faith who are by their birth members of this faith. And we're in the early, because still, although crypto is on crypto time, there's still human time. Like, it's regardless of how long it takes for for a transaction to move around the world, it still takes a human being 9 months to gestate. So we still have that limit, and then it takes them however many years to become even old enough to be able to be an economic actor within the marketplace. So, I mean, being a part of the Free State Project, seeing the families that were there. And again, some people might call that a cult. The behavior is very much all there for it to be a religion. And I was certainly love bombed my way right to moving my family up there, and well worth it too. Like, a great cult to be a part of. Again, there's nothing pejorative about a cult at all. It can be absolute. There are bad cults and good cults, and I think the good cults far outweigh the bad cults.
Well,
Go ahead.
sorry to interject, but wouldn't you say that the human, like, just to be a fully developed, or at least to live on some sort of level of happiness as a human, that you need a cult
Oh, for
in
100%.
your life.
Yes.
And traditionally in the West, right, at least within our our known experiences that we kind of are used to, right, there's traditional religions that usually have filled that. And now I think we talked about that on a past episode of like CrossFit and veganism and all that kind of stuff is now kind of come. But I think that the people who don't have that, or don't have well developed, or uh, I don't want to say high quality, but I don't know a better word to use it. But people that don't have a high quality cult in their life are the ones that are usually the most lost and the most depressed, or don't have,
100%.
whatever they have the issue in their life, the issues in their life that they're not able to actually fully function in society or just be happy and be content as a human.
Well, you need a tribe. Our psyche, our biology, everything about us evolved. A vast majority of the evolution of human beings since we've been on this planet, the functional organizational unit was the tribe. And I think that as we got into these larger units, um, those tribes started to take the form of these religious cults. There's no doubt about it, because you have to make an internal separation, right? Like, the people around you, they speak the same language, they eat the same food, they're from the same place, but they're not like you. And anyway, even if they were like you can't interact with more than, what do they say, that it's like 125 people or something is this magic number to where you can actually have relationships with all of them or so. I may be wrong. It may be closer to 200, but it's low. And so that, people gravitate towards, that's about the size of a church, so the average church congregation. And so people, this replaces the tribe that we literally need down to our like biological. We have a deep seated need for that relationship with other people in that sort of size of a group, where we can say that they're in groups and out groups. But this is the reason why I don't think that the adoption of Bitcoin is a technological problem. I think it's a religious problem. And I think that, I have children, you have children, and, my kids are very young. They're going to be raised their whole lives around, because I plan on spending the rest of my life in this space. I've never run across anything in my entire lifetime that I'm so fascinated by every day and interested in. And I know how much I don't know. And I know that I could spend the rest of my life gaining that knowledge, and that the scope of that knowledge grows even more every day. There's more to learn. There's more that is created to be learned each day than I can learn in a day. So it's sustainable. It's endless. This is a great journey that I can go on, and that I'll be happy to be on, and that means something. It gives my life meaning, and they're going to be raised around it. So it's just like if I was a hardcore Christian and they were raised in a Christian household, and maybe they fall in with it and they really like it, and maybe they don't, but there will be a percentage that will. And as the generations pass and those traditions pass on, those will be things. And to where it's just in the DNA of a certain group of people, especially as some of us entrepreneurs start to build out businesses that we can pass on to our family, that's what's going to do it. And, as fast as crypto may move, I think that we are actually going to hit a user experience and technology wall within maybe the next 20 years, where there's not really anything left except the religion, where there's nothing left to really be developed. There's things to maintain and whatnot, but basically the technology is about as good as it's going to get, which is kind of the place we're at with paper money, to be honest. And it's really kind of the place that we're at with like credit cards, debit cards. You can add little kind of UIs, but the Visa network is the Visa network is the Visa network. And that's sort of where it's at. Banking is banking is banking is banking. And Bitcoin's eventually going to reach that place. And it's not going to be too long. And so what will be left and where adoption is going to happen is it's going to happen on the cultural side, on the religious side. And so I think paying attention to those cults which look the most like they could become the great religion of the future. And mind you got to have a little historical background, because you go back to like the Mormons with Joseph Smith, or like Jesus, getting nailed to a cross. You would think like, oh, that's not a good look for this cult. You know what I mean? Like, I think that's all she wrote, folks. Like, they just killed the savior. They just killed their leader. So I think it's over. But you got to kind of look a little bit further. You got to kind of look at where the basis is to see, well, why didn't that kill off the cults? And I think there's some great examples of things that are happening in Bitcoin right now. It is by far, this is the Bible times, the biblical age of Bitcoin, and so it's super exciting to be a part of it.
Yeah, if you look at, I mean, talking about the Mormons, is that when we think about Mormonism and just kind of, I don't want to compare the two necessarily, but just kind of very broad stroke of Mormonism compared to traditional Christianity or mainstream Christianity, is that when you look at some of the history of what Joseph Smith had kind of done earlier in his life, or especially Brigham Young, they were what you could, at periods of their life, or some of their actions, depending on when you're judging them from historically, you could say that they're kind of unsavory in the way
They were
that they
Craig
treated
Wrights.
people. Or
They were Craig Wrights.
yeah, and they may not be, Mormonism definitely in the last, probably 60, 70 years has gone leaps and bounds as far as for their ability to, well, I mean, it's actually been really, it's one of the things is I was the only non-Mormon in my Boy Scout troop as a kid.
I mean, my hometown was settled by Mormons as well, so there were tons of them around me as a kid as well.
Yeah, and we lived in the part of Idaho that we lived in for a period of time was basically kind of like northern Utah, and because that was all kind of like the state of desert back in the day, and it was I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but anyway,
I think that's right.
It's a really interesting. I've always been fascinated.
Me too.
By them, just because their ability to survive and thrive has been quite impressive. But yeah, to throw it back to BSV, as much as like I've been antagonistic with them, I also have to give it to them in the short period of time that they have been around, that they've been able to survive in the way that they have, and implode or whatever. It's very interesting to see the way that they operate, and also for me to use the Mormon example as well, is that just because outside in you may be going like, well, this is not legitimate and this is not real Bitcoin and whatever else you want to say, that doesn't mean that X is not going to. I mean, shoot, I mean, we still have Peercoin, Namecoin.
Exactly.
I mean, shit. Dogecoin is pardon my French. Dogecoin has survived just on being a meme. Nothing else,
and none of those have
amazing.
Zealots.
I remember mining Dogecoin in 2013. Yeah, it was.
Well, none of those have Zealots either. So it's like all of those have survived, and none of those have Zealots. And then here's one that has. How many coins have Zealots? Really?
I mean, Litecoin to an extent, somewhat. I mean, they have the Litecoin evangelists pay with Litecoin, but not to the same extent. The Litecoin evangelists, to me, are, I mean, when I talk, none of them, and this is what is always kind of like pointed to me, that I don't have a lot of faith in Litecoin as a long-term project, is that they don't have that toxicity. No. That people, they don't have anybody going like, screw you, Litecoin is the future, I don't care what you think, pay with Litecoin is going to overtake, whatever, right? It's always been, well, it's we're kind of friends with everybody, and we're complimentary, and it just kind of, I don't know, that does not, like, nobody's attracted to that, other than hoping if I buy it 100 it'll go to 1,000. Other than that, like, nobody's attracted to like, oh, I want to join this group, and because I'm really attracted to this idea that we're kind of like everybody else, but not really, but kind of, yes.
Well, and Dash has Zealots, but those Zealots are on the wane because they were all being paid from out of the treasury, and now that the price has fallen, and the core devs have decided to pay themselves more, the treasury has steadily dwindled. So they had paid mouthpieces, right? But the BSV supporters, the most zealotrous,
they're organic.
Yeah, they're doing it for free. They're doing it for free, for the passion of it. Like, you can't, when you see that, you got to take note. You got to take note.
Well, and you can't buy that kind of loyalty
No.
that you see in there, and
No.
that it is somewhat reminds me a bit of kind of like earlier, the 2012, 2013 Bitcoin,
Mm-hmm.
where people were, I mean, granted, everybody that was kind of getting involved to an extent had a monetary incentive in a way of going like, well, one day, this may be, the world's reserve currency and
But it was
destroying the
still
central
hope.
banks and all that kind of stuff.
It was
But
still faith,
yeah,
right? It
but
was still hope. It wasn't like,
yeah,
ooh, it really will go up. That like, at least it
yeah.
wasn't for me. Like, I bought at 15, like, and this tells you I know, because I still have the email and I bring it out and I show it to people sometimes. So I was just buying hand to hand on local Bitcoin, and then one of the guys that I was buying from, I've got the email where it's like late December 2012, and he's like, "Hey man, I just got back from LA. I've got like a tranche of 100 Bitcoin that I will sell to you at 10% above spot." And I was like, "Okay, well, what's that going to be?" And he said $14.25. And my response back is, "I don't know, that seems a little expensive to me." And then in November, it went up to 1,000. So I know where my head was at in terms of, is the value of this thing going to go up anytime soon? In December 2012, I didn't believe that. That's not why I was buying it. That's not what I was buying it for. And I think that that's a lot closer to where the mentality of BSV folks is. And the thing is, that's actually proven to be the right mentality to have, because the people who got involved and had that mentality at that time are now basically the people who have benefited the most over the life of Bitcoin at this point. And so, there's a very good chance that if they keep building this community out, and they've got the people who have the funds who keep manipulating the market in the way that they are. And again, it's like, hey, am I going to hate on them for finding a way to manipulate the market and manipulate their price? Like, what? I'm not them. I'm not saying like, oh, bring in the regulators and blah blah. I'm not. My principles say, you know what? They figured out a way to do it. So there you go. They figured out how to play the game. It's not cheating. It's just
the same way
game.
as kind of like Shark Pool, right?
Sure.
Playing within the rules that exist already within the market that you're operating in.
Yeah, I can't. I'm not going to hate on that. I mean, it's for people shouldn't be shouldn't be fooled or naive into believing that it's somehow organic and it's somehow a measure of the overall marketplace saying Craig Wright is Satoshi or something like that. But by the same token, it's like, hey, at least give credit to them for actually taking lemons and making lemonade. Or maybe it was lemonade to begin with that they got delisted from all those exchanges. Maybe they wanted to get delisted. Maybe it's 5D chess. I don't know. But either way, it's worked out good for them. And so I got to give them credit for that. You know what I mean? Like, great. And so I look at that and I'm like, ooh, nobody else is doing this. This is actually smart what they're doing. Don't count them out. Don't count them out.
Well, do you see, I mean, even maybe outside of Bitcoin as well, do you see anybody that is somewhat understanding that playbook, and if not, just kind of zoom out and be as objective as we could be, what do you think would be the best way for people in non BSV Bitcoin chains, if they want to kind of capture that same narrative, to be able to not necessarily, I don't have any confidence in their ability to actually become the chain, right? But to kind of capture that same sort of market share.
Okay, so I think that if anybody goes out to try to do this consciously, they're going to fail horribly, because I don't think that religions are born consciously. I think that I don't think Craig Wright is doing this consciously. He does have a degree in theology. It's probably some of the things that he knows and has learned, and his interests have probably been in this direction. Well, there's no doubt they've been in this direction. You don't go and study theology if you have no, and get a PhD if you have no interest in which is which is, by the way, in my mind, his only legit PhD that is like really provable, that is undisputed, is a doctorate. And it's, I guess, I don't know if a theology doctorate, it's a doctorate. I don't know if it's a PhD. It's a doctorate, though, of theology, if you're not interested in religion. So I think that this is basically happening organically. You've got a sort of messianic figure. He's claiming to be something, basically claiming to be the risen Christ, claiming to be the Messiah. He's very confident about it. He has, been able to sway some people. He's had some help in that movement from getting co-signed by people like Roger Ver. And it's taken it to where it is. And it's got all of the things that a cult has, and I think that it sort of just manifested itself organically. I would say that it's going to be there, and it's going to be the cult, and it's going to attract people who want to be in that type of a cult. But I think that really what people have to do is they just have to find something that they can work on. And that's been the most important thing for me about BCH is I look at BTC and there's nothing there for me to work on. I think that that's why a lot of these developers are going towards Lightning, because it's like, oh God, finally, it's not just like this granite rock that there's nothing more that can be done. Like, finally, I can actually work on something. Finally, there's something that, as engineers, we want to solve problems. Like, finally, there's some problems to be solved. It's not just stagnant and unchanging. That's what excites me about BCH. It's that chain. So what people need to do is if they care for a chain to grow, they've got to find something where they can add some value. And hodling is not adding value. Just being another validating node is not, in my opinion, it's not adding value. It can give you some value from a standpoint of, I think the price of Bitcoin is going to go up in the medium term. I think it's eventually going to be flipped by one of the other two, but I think that's still a long ways off. That could be like a decade away. So if you want to hold and do all of that, that's fine. But to attach some sort of morality to it seems a little strange to me. If I was going to attach morality to something, I'd attach it onto actually building something, which looks like it's only happening on those two other chains, but also Ethereum. They just, they don't have that sort of cult aspect. I think some of that is because people are not working on Ethereum per se, but they're working on their own little project that's a smart contract based thing that's on Ethereum. So you don't get that sort of cohesion that you do when it's a single token. And you may see some of that broken apart by these SLP tokens. That may end up breaking apart the BCH community and taking cohesion away in the same way that it was taken away with in Ethereum. So yeah, I don't think that consciously people will be able to bring those things in, but I think that if people are conscious and they do see those things happening, that they can amplify them. That if they see, oh, here's a cool ritual that people have started to pick up kind of all on their own, it's like, add to that, amplify it, do it more. But it's going to be really hard to like consciously insert anything. That's not how effective rituals happen. They evolve organically.
Yeah, no, I mean, you kind of you still see this a bit with the Bitcoin Pizza Day, and you saw Lightning Pizza and all that kind of stuff kind of jump up. But that's a once a year thing. That's not a daily thing. So, yeah, I think that's it is really difficult because when you're absolutely right, when it feels forced, that's when people are just kind of like,
Right.
Okay, thought leaders or people that buy in will participate in it, but it's the same thing as like a viral meme. The ones that feel forced and someone's trying to make something a meme that's not really. You'll get the people, especially if it's from somebody with like a high follower count. Like you'll have a certain amount of likes and retweets just based on how popular they are. But when it's something that actually captures that imagination of the public, that's when you see it just jump and it just goes crazy. And even people who have been, in the space, whatever it is, even within understanding what memes and the power of them are usually, like the popular ones are the ones that they get caught off guard by. It just kind of happens.
Yes.
And a lot of times it's until long afterwards, like you don't really understand why it did capture that attention. It's a very um, it's I guess it's a modern day magic, I guess, in a way.
100%. I mean, I think we're returning to an age of magic, and Bitcoin is, after all, magic internet money. So I think it's more than if you're going to have communities of magic and sort of religious communities, I think magic internet money is a great totem for that. It's kind of like the magic man in the sky. So it's pretty awesome, man.
And we've it's been going, actually. I kind of lost track of time there, and I want to be cognizant of the fact that you've got other obligations and everything like that. So how can people get a hold of you and find out what you're up to?
vinarmani.com. There's podcast episodes, links to my book and my other links, and at Vin Armani on Twitter. Cointext.io is my company. 42 countries, so you're probably, if you're listening to this, within one of the countries that we support. Go and check that out. So yeah, that's about it.
Well, thanks again. I always really enjoy our conversations, and thanks for coming on.
Same. I always enjoy it as well. It is my pleasure, and I'm happy to come back on anytime. Thanks so much.